Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's webinar. The topic for today is e-commerce in China and what you need to know. Before we start today's presentation, I would just like to remind everyone that everybody will be receiving a copy afterwards by email. In addition, just to know that everyone can hear me, if you could raise your hand, then I can keep going, and I know you're listening. In addition to that, if you have any questions during the webinar, please don't hesitate to put them into the questions section of the webinar system. I may not have time at the end of the webinar to do a Q&A, but I will be replying to you by email at the end. So please don't hesitate to fill in the questions box. For those of you that are new to Klako Group's webinars, I just want to briefly introduce who we are. Klako Group is an international accounting and management consulting firm that is based out of Hong Kong. There are over 120 consultants, legal professionals, and accountants that are based throughout the 10 offices, with the head office being Hong Kong, and then there's Singapore, and then there are 8 additional offices in China. We assist clients in entering the Chinese market, starting off with business advisory services and all the administration services that are required to maintain and comply with the regulations for company maintenance. Our clients are typically small to medium-sized companies who are not yet in the market but are looking to enter. One of our niche advantages is that we do speak 7 languages and are able to communicate with our clients directly when and if needed. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler. I'm a director at Klako Group. I've been with the firm since the end of 2003 when I was made China director and was relocated to Shanghai. I've been helping Western clients from all over the world in terms of their market entry, also dealing with M&A transactions, liquidations that also have occurred. I'm also co-author with our founder and chairman for our monthly magazine, which is ChinaInvest.biz, which highlights all the new topics or themes that are related to China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So I hope you all enjoy today's webinar. E-commerce has been an extremely hot topic for the last 6 months, and it's been amazing for me to see the change in the types of questions that companies ask when entering the China market. I never imagined that e-commerce would be one of those topics. Before we begin in terms of how to actually do e-commerce business, I do want to give a few statistics on the consumer behavior of Chinese individuals in China. So in 2010, there was an estimated 160 million Chinese online shoppers, 35%, which is 35% of the total internet users in 2010. So the figure is now forecast at the end of 2013 to reach 231 million online shoppers, which will account for 40% of internet users. So most of these users have broadband access, and mobile e-commerce is also a growing trend. Those using their mobile devices to buy and pay for goods online doubled from 3.5% at the end of 2008 to 6.8% by the end of 2010, and it's increased to about 10% as of the end of 2012. So it's a dramatic increase just in terms of mobile devices being used to pay. Chinese consumers are regularly comparing the prices between online stores and physical stores, and they're always opting for the cheaper choices. So in order to remain competitive, companies really do need to build in a responsiveness to the daily price changes in both their online and offline retail platforms. To give you an understanding of who are the shoppers, well, 90% of the online shoppers are between the ages of 10 to 39, 70% are living in the urban areas, and generally they have a monthly income of 5,000 RMB or less. And to my surprise, 45% are women. But that explains also the type of products that are being sold. If you look at the products that are being sold, it's usually fashion cosmetic items, daily goods, food, products, baby products, etc., which is what usually the women are buying online. Who stays away from online shopping? Well, it's those individuals that want to see and need to see a product. They need to touch it, to feel it, to understand what it is in order to be able to buy it. What we've noticed is that many individuals will go into actual physical retail shops to look at products, make the price comparison, and if it is cheaper, then they will go ahead and buy it online. But they still want to see and touch the physical product. Many worry about after-sales services and what type of service you will get, whether you can, if there's a default in the product, whether you can bring it back, and how easy it is to bring it back. The online payment system is too complicated, and tied to that is many people don't have debit or credit cards. Many people forget to realize that there is still a huge population in China that are illiterate, that don't have debit or credit cards and can't go and do online payment in terms of buying products. But obviously, all the points from 2 to 4 are improving dramatically. And more people, especially in the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, are absolutely getting debit and credit cards. What's interesting, and again, many people forget, is that when an individual is working for a SOE, which is a state-owned enterprise, or a Chinese private enterprise, they usually get their salaries in cash, which means they don't need to have a bank account. And as a result, they don't get the debit or credit cards. In terms of the online payment systems, obviously you need it to be in Chinese in order for people to understand how to actually make the payment process. One thing I'd like to just point out here as well is that Chinese credit and debit cards are very different than Western credit cards. There are an additional 3 figures on a credit card number. And as a result of that, there has to be a completely different online payment system that needs to be adapted to take in these debit and credit cards. So what are the e-commerce regulations in China, and what do you need to know basically to go into the Chinese market with e-commerce? I'm highlighting here the license regulations, and I will also be going through the various business models that are available. In China, obviously internet content, as many of you know, is controlled and supervised by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. What's important to note here is that the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology are censoring websites and are blocking websites depending on the content that is on the site. So whenever you're doing e-commerce, you have to keep this in mind. If you have content which is related to China, or you're selling products to China, and you highlight this on your website, absolutely your website will be censored and will be viewed from the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. And there is always a chance that at some point your website could be blocked. So this is one comment that I want to highlight, that absolutely your website could eventually be blocked. And you always have to be careful of the type of content that you're putting on. If you are a company that wants to have a business model similar to Amazon, to eBay, to Tmall or Taobao, whereby you're assisting third-party companies in selling their products online, you do need to have a commercial ICP license. The commercial ICP license is difficult to obtain. You're required to be a joint venture with the majority of the shares being held by a Chinese company. And your website will be thoroughly scrutinized on a daily basis to see what content is on there. If you are a company that wants to sell its own products online, and you're already doing this maybe through a physical retail shop or wholesale, based on wholesale purposes, then you will need to apply for what is called a non-commercial ICP license. Now, what is interesting about this non-commercial ICP license is that in places like Shanghai, you don't even need to do the physical application. So there is no actual license per se that you obtain. However, this is just an example for Shanghai. In places like Beijing, there is a physical license that you need to apply for in order to be able to do this. Now, this is something that a lot of companies don't realize that they need to apply for. it is always advisable to check with the local authorities whether it is needed or not and how complicated the application process is. So the business models that are available, well, quite simply, you can have, it all relates to where your domain name is for your website. Now, if you want to have a .cn on your domain name, then this can only be applied for through a Chinese registered company in China. A Hong Kong company, a US company, a European company cannot apply or buy a domain name with a .cn in it. This regulation changed about 3 to 4 years ago. So if you do have a domain name under your US company, you're very lucky, or your European company, you're very lucky because this is actually no longer permitted. So the idea here is whether you want to have your domain name outside of China or whether you want to have your domain name inside of China. Now, on this business model, it's considering that your domain name will be outside of China. And obviously, the path of least resistance in terms of selling to Chinese consumers is that you have your existing website, which is outside of China, and you upgrade it to include the Chinese language and to accept Chinese credit cards. In order to accept the Chinese credit cards, you can discuss this with your bank, as now globally you can transact in RMB in any case, and there are online payment systems like Alipay which cater to Chinese consumers being able to purchase online. Now, what are the disadvantages to having your website outside of China? Well, one of the issues is delivery. If your products are being manufactured outside of China, then they naturally need to be imported, and your end customer is liable to pay the import duty. In addition, if you don't have an office in China, how does the after-sales service work from a lengthy distance away where there might be different time zones, etc.? In addition to that, because you don't have the ICP license locally, it could potentially be that your website gets blocked depending on the type of content that you have on there. So all of these drawbacks really show that potentially having a website outside of China is not the most convenient of options. In addition to that, you have to be aware that marketing and PR is a big issue in order to let the consumers know that your website exists and that you can buy products online. So not only do you have after-sales service issues, maybe even logistical issues, but you also have to think of the aspect of marketing and PR. How will the Chinese consumers know about my website if my website is not located in China and I don't have an office in China? So this is again something to think about. What happens if your website is in China? So your domain name is in China. Well, in this case, you have to have an entity in China. So assuming that you have an entity, your entity will be able to handle all the after-sales service. It will be able to handle all the logistical processes that are involved when handling e-commerce. They will be able to supervise the warehouse plus the inventory. And it will be much easier to do your marketing and PR locally in order for people to understand that you have a website and that they can access it easily using a .cn. So having the website in China is definitely a better solution in terms of being successful on the market. But having said that, it is a lot more time consuming and there's a lot more effort required. Using third-party platforms outside of China, and here I'm referring to using Amazon.com or eBay.com or any of these websites that are outside of China. Now, the biggest dilemma here in utilizing these sites is that Chinese consumers have no clue how to access them. They won't access Amazon.com if it's not in a Chinese language. So there are cultural issues as well that you need to consider. Chinese consumers are much more comfortable using third-party platforms that are inside China, that are in the Chinese language, and that are easily accessible. So using these third-party platforms outside like Amazon or eBay, they don't have a Chinese after-sales service hotline. Logistical issues are also a nightmare because all their warehousing facilities are outside of China, so the customer still needs to import the products. And then you also have payment issues. Most of these Amazon and eBay sites outside of China don't cater to RMB payment or the Chinese credit cards. So again, this option is very limited, and you really do need to check whether it's an option at all in the place of your jurisdiction. The business model which I recommend for companies that are just starting with their e-commerce business is utilizing third-party platforms in China. Now, these platforms are, for example, Tmall or Taobao.com, which are very useful. They are in Chinese, and they do the entire process for you in terms of logistics, warehousing, payment, etc. All the Chinese consumers are familiar with these platforms. They know how to create, they know how to utilize them. The after-sales service is already taken care of by these third-party platforms. The disadvantages in my mind is that Taobao, for example, has changed its requirements in that they require that there's a Chinese company who registers with them. The reason why they're doing this is that they're trying to attract Chinese companies versus foreign investors in terms of gaining access onto these platforms. Usually there are annual fees which are rising dramatically year on year. In 2011, the annual fee for utilizing Taobao was 6,000 RMB. By the end of 2012, it had increased to 60,000 RMB. So it just shows you the popularity of people using Taobao and the successfulness there is that they can afford to increase these fees dramatically. And as I said, Taobao does require you to have a Chinese registered company in order to sign the agreement, but companies like Tmall don't require that. But it could be that they change this in the short term. So this is definitely a business model I would recommend for the early stages of your e-commerce business. One thing that a lot of people don't do, which I highly recommend you to do, and you can do it from your computer anywhere in the world, is to go onto Taobao and Tmall and to check if your product and your brand name is not already being sold without you knowing. We have had the case with an American client who was producing his products in China, and he wanted to start going onto the e-commerce platform, did a quick check of products in his category to see who the competitors might be, and he found out that his product was actually being sold on Taobao, and it was the supplier who had removed the labeling of the product and was selling them on Taobao without informing the client of this. So of course there are huge issues involved. So go ahead, just check, make sure that it's not already being sold, and if it is, then you may want to talk to your suppliers about how to fix that problem. What a lot of companies also don't think about is product liability, and this is something that you have to know before you start doing any type of sales locally in China. One of my suggestions is talk to a lawyer, understand what are your liabilities, who takes on the liabilities, understand the legal framework on product liability in China. You have to adjust all existing sales contracts in accordance with these regulations, and you have to see whether you can limit the liability as a producer or as a seller, depending on which one you are. For the producer, you have to identify the mandatory standards on specifications like packaging, labeling, indications. If you're selling food and beverage items, for example, online, you have to understand that these food and beverage items need to be first inspected by Beijing, approved, and then you have to go through a whole labeling process, and these products have to have labels on them if you want to sell. If there are no labels, then you could quite frankly be taken to court locally in China. For the seller, you really do need to implement a system of examination and acceptance of goods and make sure that there's a high standard of quality with every single product that you're selling. So what are my recommendations? Well, let me go through these points step by step. The first is there is an increasing trend of e-commerce locally in China, and it's something you can't avoid, especially if you are in the business of selling consumer products. It's highly recommended that you start investigating this business and seeing whether there really is any type of potential for you. Before embarking on the e-commerce business, you have to lay out a careful plan on how your workflow will be, not only workflow, but cash flow and goods flow from the minute that a consumer clicks the Go to Cart button on the computer. And you have to take everything from the step of importing the product or buying it locally to warehousing issues, local transportation issues, after-sales service issues, etc. And really understand every step of the process, how it's going to work. In terms of logistics and warehousing, you have to really understand whether you have to find and meet with various logistics companies to really see whether they can offer you a solution, whether you need to have refrigerated trucks delivering products, whether you need to have refrigerated warehouses. China is enormous, and if your products are being warehoused in Shanghai but need to be delivered to Chengdu, that's a 2.5-hour flight away. So you really need to understand exactly where your warehousing options will be. How will your transportation be? Will you be transporting by air, train, through the rivers, etc.? You really have to understand this. Utilizing the third-party platforms is great, but it all comes down to marketing and PR and being ranked high so that people see your products. You really need to do search engine optimization as well to make people aware that your products exist and to be able to buy them. It's a whole different marketing concept compared to retail shopping versus e-commerce shopping, and you have to take this into mind. For third-party platforms, it's really important to understand how the ranking systems work. And obviously the higher that you're ranked on a product, the more visibility you will have. If you're less ranked, then the less visibility. Chinese consumers don't have a fear of voicing their opinions on a product. So if you do get bad feedback, then your ranking will also go lower. So you need to be careful of this. And lastly, and this is something that people really don't consider at all, don't underestimate your resources. You do need to spend the time, the capital, and as well as the human resource in terms of developing this. In China, whether you're planning on doing wholesale business, retail business, or e-commerce business, you need to invest in it. And don't expect that your staff can spend half their time on this only. You really need to understand what marketing options are working, which ones are not. The whole logistical side needs to be taken care of. And I always say you really do need to have a dedicated team taking care of the entire business. So that's actually the end of our presentation. I breezed through that. I hope that it was clear enough for you to understand how e-commerce works, what options are available. If you do have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. And you can just send them by email to info@klako.com or also to christina.kohler@klako.com. And as I said, I will be sending you the presentation in a few minutes so that you can review it yourself. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Please do join us again. You can find out our future webinars online at our events section on our website. So I look forward to seeing you all again. Have a good evening and a pleasant remainder of the week. Bye-bye.